La 9143e séance du Conseil de sécurité est ouverte. L'ordre du jour provisoire de la présente séance est maintien de la paix et de la sécurité de l'Ukraine. L'ordre du jour est adopté. Conformément à l'article 37 du règlement intérieur provisoire du Conseil, j'invite le représentant de l'Ukraine à participer à la présente séance. Il en est ainsi décidé. Le Conseil de sécurité va maintenant aborder l'examen du point 2 de l'ordre du jour. Les membres du Conseil sont saisis d'un projet de résolution publié sous la cote S 2022-720, déposé par l'Albanie et les États-Unis d'Amérique. Le Conseil est prêt à procéder au vote sur le projet de résolution dont il est saisi. Je donne à présent la parole aux membres du Conseil qui souhaitent faire une déclaration avant le vote. Je donne la parole à la représentante des États-Unis.
Thank you, Mr. President. Yesterday, the Secretary General said, and I quote, "The UN Charter is clear. Any annexation of a state or territory by another state resulting from the threat or use of force is a violation of the principles of the UN Charter and international law," unquote. That very violation is what we are confronted with today. The United States has proposed a resolution with Albania to condemn the illegal so-called referenda held in Ukrainian territory. The resolution is straightforward. It condemns these illegal referenda. It calls on all states to not recognize any altered state of Ukraine. And it requires that Russia withdraw its troops from Ukraine immediately. We have heard from many of you over the course of the past few days that you felt the process was rushed. Let me be clear. What was rushed was the Russian illegal act to annex Ukrainian territory. As a council, we had to respond. Colleagues, this is exactly what the Security Council was made to do: defend sovereignty, protect territorial integrity, promote peace and security. The United Nations was built on an idea that never again would one country be allowed to take another's territory by force. That path, we agreed, leads to history's most horrific outcomes. Russia's attempted annexations are, without a shadow of doubt, exactly that. We're talking about a UN member state, a Security Council member, attempting to annex part of another through force. The outcomes of these sham referenda were predetermined in Moscow, and everybody knows it. They were held behind the barrel of Russian guns. Time and time again, we have seen the Ukrainian people fight for their country and their democracy. The Ukrainian civilian who removed a Russian landmine with his bare hands, the Ukrainians abroad who returned to fight for their country, the soldiers sacrificing their lives to stop Russian advances. Putin miscalculated the resolve of the Ukrainians. The Ukrainian people have demonstrated loud and clear they will never accept being subjugated to Russian rule. And so the United States will never recognize any territory Russia attempts to seize or allegedly annex as anything other than part of Ukraine. Secretary General Guterres has said the same. He said yesterday, again, and I quote, "Any decision to proceed with the annexation of Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson, and Zaporizhia regions of Ukraine would have no legal value and deserves to be condemned. Let me repeat that. Deserves to be condemned. The Secretary General then said it went against, and I quote again, the purposes and principles of United Nations. It is a dangerous escalation. In his words, it has no place in the modern world. It has no place in the modern world. Colleagues, we all have an interest in defending the sacred principles of sovereignty and territorial integrity, in defending peace in our modern world. All of us understand the implications for our own borders, our own economies, and our own countries if these principles are tossed aside. This is also bigger than any one nation, large or small. It's about our collective security, our collective responsibility to maintain international peace and security, not just for ourselves, but for the world. This is what this body is here to do. We are the first line of defense for the UN Charter, and we must demonstrate that we take that defense seriously. We must show that the Council can work despite the actions of one permanent member. This is not a moment to stand on the sidelines. This is a moment to stand up for the UN Charter, for its values, for its principles, and for its purposes. And if Russia chooses to shield itself from accountability, then we will take further steps in the General Assembly to send an unmistakable message to Moscow that the world is still on the side of defending sovereignty and protecting territorial integrity. Earlier today, we saw Putin celebrate this clear violation of international law. He threw a party on Red Square to pat himself on the back for these illegal referenda. He's gloating and reminiscing about the Soviet Empire and stated that this was just the beginning. As we all sit in this chamber and solemnly consider this resolution, Putin is instead boastfully shoving our shared values in our faces. It's time we stand up to defend our collective beliefs together. In defense of these principles that we hold dear, the United States is putting forward this resolution with Albania. In defense of all countries to have the right to be safe from invasion and annexation, we are voting yes. And in defense of the world's collective peace and security, we urge you to vote yes too. Let us show Putin the resolve of this Council. Thank you, Mr. President.
Je remercie la représentante des États-Unis pour sa déclaration et je donne à présent la parole à la représentante du Royaume-Uni.
Thank you, President. Colleagues, Russia's annexations further jeopardize the prospects for peace, and they fundamentally undermine the purposes and the principles of the United Nations. The area Russia is claiming to annex is more than 90,000 square kilometers. This is the largest forcible annexation of territory since the Second World War. There is no middle ground on this. It is, in the end, a very simple question of principle, as the Secretary General has said. As members of the Security Council, with the responsibility of maintaining international peace and security and upholding the UN Charter, we must condemn Russia's actions and vote in favour of this resolution. Thank you.
Je remercie la représentante du Royaume-Uni pour sa déclaration et je donne à présent la parole au représentant de la Fédération de Russie.
Господин председатель, мы вынуждены констатировать, что некоторые из наших коллег по Совету достигли своего дна. Нарушены даже те немногие приличия, которые, как нам казалось, еще оставались в этом зале. Мы не знаем примеров, чтобы Совет Безопасности когда-либо принимал резолюции, прямо осуждающие одного из членов Совета. Скажите, вы всерьез рассчитываете, что Россия может рассмотреть и поддержать такой проект? А если нет, то получается, вы намеренно подводите нас под применение права вето, чтобы затем разглагольствовать о том, что Россия им злоупотребляет. Такие откровенно враждебные действия со стороны Запада – это отказ от взаимодействия и сотрудничества в Совете, отказ от наработанных годами практик и опыта. Это не что иное, как низкопробная провокация с понятной всем целью. Господин председатель, 27 сентября мы уже подробно рассказывали о причинах и целях проведения референдумов в Донецкой и Луганской республиках, а также Херсонской и Запорожской областях. 28 сентября подведены окончательные итоги волеизъявления. Подавляющее большинство проголосовавших, 99% в ДНР, 98% в ЛНР, 93% в Запорожье и 87% в Херсонщине поддержали идею объединения этих регионов с Россией. Несмотря на сложную ситуацию с безопасностью и провокации киевского режима, отдать свой голос решило подавляющее большинство избирателей. От 76% в Херсонской области до 97% в ДНР. Результаты плебисцита говорят сами за себя. Жители этих регионов не хотят возвращаться на Украину и сделали осознанный и свободный выбор в пользу нашей страны. Референдумы были проведены в полном соответствии с нормами и принципами международного права, как бы ни пытались доказать обратное наши западные оппоненты или даже генсекретарь, решивший вдруг, без наличия на то мандата, говорить за всю Организацию Объединенных Наций. Более сотни международных наблюдателей из Италии, Германии, Венесуэлы, Латвии и других стран, следившие за ходом голосования, также признали его итоги легитимными. Вашингтон, который сегодня громче всех критикует нас и кричит о территориальной целостности Украины в состав Российской Федерации. После их утверждения в Российском парламенте и подписания указа президента, воля жителей Донбасса, Запорожья и Херсонщины по воссоединению с Россией будет реализована. Никакого поворота назад, который нам навязывается сегодняшним проектом резолюции, не будет. Киевский режим, поставивший интересы своих западных спонсоров выше интересов собственного народа, сам оттолкнул от себя
above the interests of its own people, push these regions away from itself, and it is to blame for this outcome. The Maidan authorities seem not to have drawn any conclusions so far. Today, we are witnessing yet another atrocity carried out by the Kiev regime. The Ukrainian Nazis have fired on a column of people who were waiting for permits to enter territory under our control in Zaporizhia, and there are dozens of deaths.
Хочу отметить, что у Совета был шанс принять действительно сбалансированный и полезный документ. В конструктивном духе мы предлагали поправки, которые поддержали бы многие из здесь присутствующих. О том, что необходимо уважать как территориальную целостность всех стран-членов, так и принцип самоопределения народов в соответствии с уставом и декларацией
the Charter and the Declaration on the Principles of International Law of 1970.
О том, что в соответствии с документами ОБСЕ, под которым, кстати, все страны Запада подписались, безопасность государства неделима, государств неделимы, и никто не должен укреплять свою безопасность за счет безопасности. Мы предлагали отметить объективный факт того, что члены Совета по-разному оценивают итоги прошедших референдумов. Кто будет спорить с тем, что прямое волеизъявление граждан является важнейшим элементом демократического устройства. Может быть, те, для кого в случае Косово никакой референдум не понадобился? Наконец, мы предлагали зафиксировать призыв Совета ко всем вовлеченным сторонам интенсифицировать поиск дипломатического пути разрешения конфликта. Разве не это должно быть целью наших совместных усилий? Получается, что наши
It
бывшие
seems that our
западные
former Western
партнеры
partners
лишний раз
have
расписались
once
в том, что
again
на самом деле
demonstrated
не хотят
that
мира на
in
Украине.
reality they do not
Они
want
мечтают
peace
о поражении России.
in Ukraine. They dream
И
of
это в
Russia's
свете
defeat,
оголтелой
and
враждебности
in light
Запада
of the rabid
ставит перед
animosity
нами
of the
иные
West,
задачи.
puts other goals before us.
Логика авторов документов становится понятной,
The
если
logic
посмотреть
of the
на
authors of this
избранный ими
document becomes
непрозрачный
clear
метод
if
его
we
согласования
look
через
at the
двусторонние
non-transparent method
консультации.
that they have chosen to negotiate it through
Когда одни
bilateral
члены Совета
consultations,
не могли
when
видеть,
certain
что
members of the
думают и
Council
предлагают
were
другие коллеги.
unable to see what
Все
other
мы
members,
прекрасно
what their
понимаем
colleagues were thinking and
отведенную этому проекту
proposing.
задачу
We
и
are
его
all well
судьбу.
aware of the goal
Авторы
of this
готовы
draft and its
обесценить
fate.
усилия Совета
Its
как главного
authors
органа по поддержанию мира и
are prepared to
безопасности
devalue the
и
efforts
в
of the Council
наглую
as the principal
использовать
organ
эту
for the maintenance
площадку
of peace
как
and security, and
разогрев
brazenly
перед
use this
основным
forum
шоу
as a
Генассамблеи.
dress rehearsal before their main
Там уже
performance in the
Запад
General
по известной
Assembly.
схеме
There,
мобилизует
the
свои
West is going to
ресурсы
use
для
their familiar
давления
scheme to
и
mobilize
выкручивания рук всем
resources, exert
государствам-членам,
pressure, and
до
twist the
кого он
arms of all
сможет
member
дотянуться.
states that they can reach.
Кто-то дрогнет.
Some will
Но хочется
falter,
надеяться, что
but we
многие все
hope
же выстоят.
that many will be
Те,
able
кто
to
готов иметь
withstand
и
this
защищать
pressure.
свое
Those who are
собственное мнение,
prepared to hold and
проводить
protect
жизнь
their own opinion,
независимую
those who are
политику
prepared to
и на
pursue
деле
an
отставить
independent
принцип
policy
суверенного равенства
and
государств. Те,
uphold the
кто
principle of the
против
sovereign equality of states and
гегемонии
actions,
одного
those who
государства и
oppose the
его
hegemony
сателлитов,
of one
не
state and its
воспринимающих
satellites,
другие государства в
do not
качестве
see other
равноправных
states as
партнеров.
equal partners.
Надеемся, что члены
We
ООН
hope
смогут непредвзято
that the
разобраться в
members of the
складывающейся
UN
ситуации и
will be
сделать
able to form their own
правильный выбор.
unbiased view
Благодарю.
of this emerging situation and make the right choice. Thank you very much for your opinion.
Je remercie le représentant de la Fédération
Thank you
de
to the
Russie
representative of the
de
Russian
sa
Federation
déclaration.
for that statement.
Je vais
I
maintenant
will now
mettre le projet de résolution aux
Put
voix.
the draft resolution
Que
to
ceux
the vote.
Qui sont en faveur
Those in
du projet de
favor
résolution
of
publié sous la cote S
draft resolution
2022-720,
stroke
lève la main.
2022 stroke 720, please raise your hand.
Que ceux qui sont abstention ou non d'abord que
Microphone for
le
the
projet de résolution
those against the draft
lève la main.
resolution, please raise your hands.
Que ceux qui s'abstiennent sur ce
Abstentions.
projet de résolution
Please raise your hands.
lèvent la main. Les résultats,
The results
le résultat du vote
of the vote
est le
are
suivant.
as follows.
Le projet de
The draft
résolution
resolution
a retenu 10 voix pour,
10 for,
1 voix contre
1 against,
et
and
4
4
abstentions.
abstentions.
Le projet de
The
résolution
draft resolution
n'est pas adopté
has not been
par
adopted
suite du vote
owing to
négatif
the negative
d'un
vote
membre permanent
of a
du
permanent member
Conseil.
of the Council.
Je donne maintenant la
I
parole
now give the floor
aux membres du Conseil
to members of the
qui
Council
souhaitent faire une
who wish to
déclaration
make a statement
après le vote.
after the vote.
Je donne la parole
give the
à
floor
l'Albanie.
To Albania.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. President.
This is another dark day for the Security Council, for the United Nations, and for the world. The Security Council was again taken hostage on the same issue and by the same country, and was prevented from acting on one of the most important issues on its agenda. Once more, Russia misused a unique privilege that the UN Charter, the very one that Russia, with its actions, is shredding to pieces, has granted to permanent members to maintain peace and security and uphold the international law and not to block the Council when the world needs it. The text proposed today was about the most fundamental issues and principles that bound us together in the United Nations, in the multilateral world, the preservation of territorial integrity, the sovereignty and independence of a UN member state. As it has done since 24th of February, Russia chose to stand in total opposition with international law, with its own commitments, with all the repeated calls from every corner of the world to stop its actions, change course, and work for peace. Today's vote showed once more that Russia is and remains isolated in its actions and with its positions. Today's vote showed that Russia never wanted peace, never wanted dialogue. What it wanted was only a part of the territory of Ukraine, which now claims that it's its own, will not accept it, and will not recognize any of the consequences of the Russia's actions that go to the detriment of Ukraine. Colleagues, what is happening now in Ukraine should be an alarming bell for the entire world. We should not accept illegal annexation of the territory of other countries. We reiterate the call on all states and international organizations not to recognize any acquisition by the Russian Federation of any part of the territory of Ukraine, and to refrain from any action or dealing that might be interpreted as recognizing any such acquisition. We must be united and firmly condemn this unacceptable behavior and stand in defense of and support Ukraine, because in this way we defend the rules-based international order, international law, and the UN Charter. We'll continue our fight in the GA, and we'll call on the General Assembly to defend the UN Charter. And as to the referred Russian matter, to draw artificial parallels with other situations which have nothing to do with Russia's aggression, we have been clear about it more than once, and we are not going to dignify such claims which are of the same nature as there is no war in Ukraine, we have committed no crimes there, and we do not want its territory. We trust everyone is today more than ever eyes wide open, and I thank you.
Je remercie la représentante de l'Albanie de sa déclaration et je donne à présent la parole à la représentante de l'Inde.
Thank you, Mr. President. India is deeply disturbed by the recent turn of developments in Ukraine. We've always advocated that no solution can ever be arrived at the cost of human lives. We urge that all efforts are made by concerned sides for the immediate cessation of violence and hostilities. Dialogue is the only answer to settling differences and disputes, however daunting that may appear at this moment. The path to peace requires us to keep all channels of diplomacy open. India's Prime Minister has unequivocally conveyed this in his discussions with world leaders, including with the presidents of the Russian Federation and Ukraine. So has our External Affairs Minister in his recent engagements at the General Assembly last week. India's Prime Minister has also emphasized that this cannot be an era of war. We therefore sincerely hope for an early resumption of peace talks to bring about an immediate ceasefire and resolution of the conflict. India's position has been clear and consistent from the very beginning of this conflict. The global order is anchored on the principles of the UN Charter, international law, and respect for sovereignty and the territorial integrity of all states. Escalation of rhetoric or tension is in no one's interest. It is important that pathways are found for a return to the negotiating table. Keeping in view the totality of the evolving situation, India decided to abstain on the resolution. Thank you.
Je remercie la représentante de l'Inde de sa déclaration et je donne à présent la parole à la représentante de la Norvège.
President, we voted in favor of this resolution. The Security Council has a responsibility to act to prevent and end acts of aggression, atrocities, and certainly breaches of territorial integrity. We deeply regret that this resolution failed to be adopted due to a single member casting its veto. It is wrong that Russia, an invading force, can also prevent Council action aimed at ending its aggression. Moscow has launched an illegal process of annexation of the Ukrainian regions of Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson, and Zaporizhzhia. The Secretary General was very clear yesterday, affirming that any annexation of a state's territory by another state resulting from the threat or use of force is a violation of the principles of the UN Charter and international law. We fully concur. Whatever outcome Russia announces in Moscow today is contrary to international law, has no legal effect, and in no way changes Ukraine's sovereignty within its internationally recognized borders. The Russian Federation, one of the 5 permanent members of the Security Council, has a clear responsibility to respect the Charter, yet its action related to Ukraine cuts against everything UN membership is supposed to stand for. With this action, Russia is isolating themselves from the global community, rejecting multilateralism, international law, and the principles and purposes of the UN Charter. They also continue to ignore the global effects they are causing. President, it is unacceptable that the Security Council has again been blocked from taking action on this significant threat to international peace and security. We are, however, assured that the General Assembly now will have the opportunity to take up this grave and important issue, and we urge the speedy production of a special report on this use of the veto. President, the position of Norway is clear. We are fully committed to the sovereignty, unity, independence, and territorial integrity of Ukraine within its internationally recognized borders. Thank you.
Je remercie la représentante de la Norvège pour sa déclaration et je donne à présent la parole au représentant de la Chine.
谢谢主席先生。主席先生，中方对刚刚付诸表决的决议草案投了弃权票。我愿就中方的投票立场做如下说明。
Sorry, Mr. President, China abstained from voting on the draft resolution just put to vote. I would like to make the following statement in relation to China's vote. Let me start again. Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, China abstained from voting on the draft resolution just put to vote. I would like to make the following statement in relation to China's vote. First, China's position on the issue of Ukraine is consistent and clear. The sovereignty and territorial integrity of all countries should be safeguarded. The purposes and principles of the UN Charter should be observed. Legitimate security concerns of all parties should be taken seriously. All efforts conducive to the peaceful resolution of the crisis should be supported. Second, over 7 months into the Ukraine crisis, the crisis and its spillover effects have had a wide range of negative impacts. The prospect of a prolonged and expanded crisis is also worrying. We believe China is deeply concerned about this prospect. We believe that the pressing priority is to make every effort to de-escalate the situation and guide the parties to restart diplomatic negotiations as soon as possible, to open the door to a political settlement with legitimate concerns brought into the negotiations and viable options on the table in an effort to achieve an early ceasefire. Third, the Security Council, as the core of the international collective security mechanism, should uphold objectivity and impartiality and give priority to using the good offices and the mediation tools conferred by the UN Charter to play a responsible and constructive role in the political settlement of the Ukraine issue. Any action taken by the Security Council should be truly conducive to easing the situation and resolving the crisis, rather than intensifying conflicts and exacerbating confrontation. Fourth, the current crisis in Ukraine is a result of the accumulation and interplay of various conflicts and tensions over a long period of time. Facts have shown that political isolation, sanctions, and pressurization, fueling the tensions and bloc confrontation will not bring peace. Instead, they will only worsen the situation and make the issue more complicated and intractable. China calls on all parties concerned to exercise restraint, refrain from actions that exacerbate tensions, and leave space for a solution through diplomatic negotiations. As a responsible country, China has always stood on the side of peace. We will continue to play a constructive role in easing the situation and resolving the crisis. Thank you, Mr. President.
Je remercie le représentant de la Chine de sa déclaration et je donne la parole à la représentante du Royaume-Uni.
Thank you, President. President, yet again, Russia has abused its veto to defend its illegal actions. Council members have voted in different ways, but one thing is clear. Not a single other member of this Council recognises Russia's attempted illegal annexation of Ukrainian territory. Russia's veto doesn't change that fact. The announcement by President Putin today of the accession of the Ukrainian regions of Kherson, Zaporizhia, Luhansk, and Donetsk into the Russian Federation has no legal effect. It is fantasy. Russia's invasion needs to end. The world has made this clear for 7 months. Yet Russia's response has been further escalation, further mobilization, nuclear threats, and today, another callous attack on a civilian convoy in Zaporizhia. The sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine is under attack. The international system is being assaulted in front of our eyes. Russia will not succeed in this illegal imperialist war. The only question is how much damage they do, how many lives they waste before they realize that. Thank you, President.
Je remercie la représentante du Royaume-Uni de sa déclaration et je donne à présent la parole au représentant de l'Irlande.
Thank you, Mr. President. Ireland voted in favour of this resolution. We did so because we believe there must be a robust response from the Security Council to yet another blatant breach of the UN Charter by the Russian Federation in its war of aggression against Ukraine. Ireland remains fully committed to the sovereignty and the territorial integrity of Ukraine within its internationally recognised borders. Earlier this week, Ireland condemned the sham referenda conducted in occupied Ukrainian territory by Russia or its proxies. Today, we categorically reject the so-called results of those illegal and illegitimate referenda and announcements purporting to annex Ukrainian territory. They have no legal effect. As I said at our meeting on Tuesday, this is nothing more than a blatant land grab by the Russian Federation. Let me be clear, Ukraine's borders have not changed. The sham referenda did not reflect the popular or freely expressed will of the Ukrainian people. They are illegal, they violate the UN Charter, they violate Russia's obligations under international law, and they violate the law of occupation. President, once again, the Russian Federation has shamefully used a veto in a flagrant attempt to excuse its own military aggression against Ukraine, a fellow member of our United Nations. The shocking images of civilians killed or injured near Zaporizhzhia this morning are a stark reminder that it is civilians who are paying the highest price for Russia's senseless war. The use of this anachronistic veto in these terrible and tragic circumstances is simply reprehensible and undermines the legitimacy of this Council in the eyes of the watching world. However, this veto will not prevent the international community from responding to Russia's blatant breaches of international law. This veto will not deter us from holding Russia accountable for its actions. In accordance with Resolution 76262, Ireland now calls on the Council to submit a special report on the use of the veto in this instance to the General Assembly. Thank you.
Je remercie le représentant d'Irlande de sa déclaration et je donne à présent la parole à la représentante du Ghana.
Thank you, Mr. President. Ghana voted in support of the draft resolution as we firmly believe in its objective to uphold the rules of international law and the principles and values of the Charter of the United Nations. We regret the unsurprising outcome of the vote and the fact that once again the use of the veto by the offending state has stood in the way of the Council's exercise of its mandate to promote and maintain international peace and security. The conduct of the referenda and the subsequent steps taken by the Russian Federation to annex the occupied territories within the internationally recognized borders of Ukraine, in our view, are illegal and constitute serious violations of the sovereignty, political independence, and territorial independence of Ukraine. They are void and of no legal effect in our view, as well as that of many in the international community. As we have repeatedly stated in this chamber, it remains our principled position not to recognize the acquisition of territory by any state through the threat or use of force. We believe that any attempt to unilaterally delineate borders, and for that matter, state territory, is an attempt to unravel the settled and accepted norms of behavior which have ensured the relative stability of our international system since this organization was established to draw the curtains on the era of conquest of territory by wars. We call on the Russian Federation to end its aggression against Ukraine and refrain from any further escalatory action and embrace a new chapter of peace, cooperation, and friendly relations, which is required of all member states. In concluding my remarks, I reaffirm Ghana's firm commitment to respect the sovereignty, political independence, and territorial integrity of Ukraine within its internationally recognized borders, and reiterate in that regard our continued support of efforts to help bring an end to the war through peaceful means. I thank you.
Je remercie la représentante du Ghana de sa déclaration et je donne à présent la parole au représentant du Mexique.
Presidente, México, quien a lo largo de su historia ha sufrido pérdida de su territorio por anexión como consecuencia de una invasión extranjera, no puede consentir que otro país sea también víctima de este tipo de actos de agresión. La posición de México ha sido muy clara en cuanto al respeto irrestricto al derecho internacional, en particular a la prohibición de la expansión territorial mediante el uso de la fuerza u otros mecanismos que contravengan la Carta de las Naciones Unidas. Esta regla de derecho internacional, prevista explícitamente en la Carta de nuestra organización y refrendada tanto por la Asamblea General como por el Consejo de Seguridad y la jurisprudencia de la Corte Internacional de Justicia, hace que los referendos celebrados en territorios ocupados en Ucrania, dentro del contexto de una invasión, carezcan de validez jurídica. México respalda la soberanía, la unidad, la independencia y la integridad territorial de Ucrania dentro de sus fronteras internacionalmente reconocidas
borders.
Y reitera su
And
apoyo
Mexico
a los
reiterates its
esfuerzos
support
del secretario
to the
general
efforts of the Secretary
y
General
de otros
and
posibles
other
actores
possible
para
actors
fomentar el
to
diálogo
promote
y la
dialogue
diplomacia,
and diplomacy
para encontrar
in order
las
to
vías políticas
find a
que
political
pongan
means
fin a esta guerra.
to an
Por lo
end to this
anteriormente
war.
expuesto,
As
México
previously stated,
votó a favor
Mexico
del proyecto de
voted in favor
resolución
of
S
draft
diagonal
resolution
2022 diagonal 720.
2022-720. Thank you.
Je remercie le
I thank
représentant du
the
Mexique de sa
representative of
déclaration
Mexico for that
et je
statement,
donne à
and I
présent
now
la
give the
parole
floor
au
to
représentant
the
du Brésil.
representative of Brazil.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, Brazil abstained on the draft proposed by Albania and the United States. Brazil expressed its views on the referenda in Ukraine at the meeting on the 27th. It is unreasonable to assume that populations in areas of conflict are able to freely express their will. The results of such referenda, under the current circumstances, do not constitute a valid or genuine expression of the will of the local populations and cannot be perceived as legitimate. Brazil stands by the principle of territorial integrity of sovereign states. We acknowledge the drafters' efforts to amend the text to make it more focused and streamlined. Mr. President, on the resolution itself, we believe that its scope and language do not favor an environment conducive to a solution for the conflict in Ukraine. It is a repetition of the same dynamics of the past months, in which the Council cannot agree on any constructive action concerning the conflict in Ukraine. Besides, the document presented to the Council members does not contribute to the immediate goals of de-escalating tensions, negotiating a ceasefire, and starting peace negotiations. We also have a few observations on the process. To circulate the draft with such short notice for consultations with our capitals did not allow member states to timely express their views and concerns. We missed a valuable opportunity of engaging collectively and in a transparent manner, making full use of our consultation spaces in the Security Council. Mr. President, this Council should now explore new courses of action. In the last 7 months, the refusal to consider alternatives did nothing to bring about a political solution to the conflict. On the contrary, it has brought about further escalation and fueled counterproductive narratives in our midst. It is time to do what is expected from us, to find solutions based on straightforward dialogue and constructive diplomacy, with a willingness to fully addressing the concerns of all parties. I thank you.
Je remercie le représentant du Brésil de sa déclaration et je donne à présent la parole au représentant du Kenya.
Thank you, Mr. President. Since the start of the war in Ukraine, Kenya has consistently called for cessation of hostilities to allow for dialogue leading to a stable European security order. Whether this is established now or following a protracted war that can escalate to an extreme danger to international peace and security, a negotiation is inevitable. It is critical to the world, and especially developing countries suffering from increased food insecurity and damaging economic turmoil, that it be undertaken now in a way that addresses the security concerns of all parties. This resolution, whether here in the Council or in the General Assembly, will not solve this crisis. Our affirmative vote is based on Kenya's principled defense of the United Nations Charter, and in particular its protection of the principle of sovereignty and territorial integrity of all member states. Our affirmative vote today is necessary on principle, but insufficient in practically ensuring that the Security Council carries out its mandate. we urge all members to do more to find a path to dialogue and diplomacy, rather than turn the Council into an arena for the continuation of conflict by diplomatic means, rather than its resolution. Mr. President, with this vote, Kenya reaffirms its recognition of Ukraine's sovereignty, territorial integrity within its internationally recognized borders. I thank you.
Je remercie le représentant du Kenya de sa déclaration et je donne à présent la parole à la représentante des Émirats arabes unis.
Thank you, Mr. President. The referenda held over the last week amidst the ongoing armed conflict and the announcement made earlier today regarding the incorporation of 4 regions into the Russian Federation are serious developments in this conflict. They make finding a peaceful resolution more difficult, and they implicate the territorial integrity, sovereignty, and independence of a UN member state. These are core principles of the United Nations Charter, central to the peaceful, cooperative, and productive relations between states, and essential for the security and stability of all. These principles protect all states, large and small, powerful and weak, and this has informed our vote today. The principle of self-determination is also a fundamental principle enshrined in the Charter we all ratified. But any tensions between this principle and the principles of territorial integrity, sovereignty, and independence need not amount to a zero-sum game. The developments of the last days warrant a clear statement from the Council, underlining the importance of the fundamental principles of the Charter. We have voted in favour of the resolution for that reason, although we would have also liked more time to engage in further edits to the text and on the substance. But as we have continuously stressed in this chamber, the pathway towards a peaceful resolution of this conflict lies in solutions that involve both sides coming to the table quickly, without preconditions, and with the support of trusted interlocutors. We urge both Russia and Ukraine to do so, and I know many around this table today and outside share in this view. This war has gone on too long and destroyed too many lives. Resolving this conflict is important not only for Ukraine and Russia and both their peoples, but also for global peace and security. We need to all stop escalation and help create the conditions for peace. We stand ready to work with all members of this Council to find ways to effectively address the root causes of this conflict and to support a diplomatic pathway forward. Thank you.
Je remercie la représentante des Émirats arabes unis pour sa déclaration et je donne à présent la parole au représentant du Gabon.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Mr. President, le Gabon abstained le vote sur la résolution soumise à l'examen du Conseil. La position de mon pays est claire. Nous sommes contre la guerre et nous sommes pour une solution diplomatique à cette guerre. Depuis le début de cette crise, nous avons martelé dans cette salle et dans ce Conseil que nous sommes pour le respect des principes de la Charte. Et nous avons continué en appelant chaque fois à la cessation des hostilités et à des négociations de bonne foi entre les parties. Nous continuons et nous continuerons d'appeler au dialogue et à des négociations de bonne foi entre les parties pour mettre fin à la guerre et promouvoir une coexistence pacifique entre les parties. Parce que nous voulons nous tenir du côté de la solution à la crise, nous réitérons notre soutien à toutes les initiatives visant une issue diplomatique et négociée à la crise. Je vous remercie.
Je remercie le représentant du Gabon
to the representative of Gabon for that statement. I will now make a statement in my capacity of representative of France.
La France condamne avec la plus grande fermeté l'annexion illégale des régions ukrainiennes de Donetsk, Luhansk et des parties des régions de Kherson et des Zaporijia au sein de la Fédération de Russie. C'est pourquoi elle a voté en faveur de la résolution qui vous était proposée. Elle appelle tous les pays attachés au respect du droit international à se joindre à cette condamnation. Ces régions, comme la Crimée, font partie intégrante de l'Ukraine dans ses frontières internationalement reconnues. La France ne reconnaîtra jamais ces annexions illégales, ni les résultats des simulacres de référendum qui les ont précédés. Elle constitue une violation flagrante de la souveraineté et de l'intégrité territoriale de l'Ukraine, ainsi que de la Charte des Nations Unies. Le secrétaire général l'a dit, toute décision de procéder à l'annexion de ces territoires n'a aucune valeur juridique et doit être condamnée. La France salue la mobilisation de tous les membres de ce Conseil qui, en votant en faveur de cette résolution, ont exprimé leur attachement au droit international et à la défense de la Charte des Nations Unies. Elle salue l'ouverture et l'esprit de compromis
and the
dont
spirit
ont
of
fait preuve
compromise
les co-auteurs de
reflected
cette résolution.
in the co-authors of the
La France
resolution's
condamne le veto
approach.
opposé
France
par
condemns
la
the
Russie,
veto put
qui
forth
montre une fois
by
de plus qu'elle foule aux pieds les
the Russian
responsabilités
Federation,
que lui
which once
confère
again
le
shows
statut de membre
its
permanent du
irresponsibility
Conseil de
in carrying
sécurité.
out its duties as
Et le
a
résultat du vote
permanent
de
member of
ce
the
jour
Security Council. And
est sans appel.
today,
La
this is without
Russie
appeal.
est plus seule que
Russia
jamais.
stands alone more than ever.
Nous regrettons
We regret
que ce Conseil n'ait pas pu se prononcer de manière unanime pour défendre les principes de souveraineté et d'intégrité territoriale qui sont pourtant les fondements du droit international. L'Ukraine se bat pour sa légitime défense. Comme le président de la République, Emmanuel Macron, l'a dit très clairement, la France continuera de se tenir aux côtés de l'Ukraine pour faire face à l'agression russe et lui permettre de recouvrer sa pleine souveraineté sur l'ensemble de son territoire. Je reprends mes fonctions de président du Conseil et je donne maintenant la parole au représentant de l'Ukraine.
Thank you, Mr. President. Distinguished members of the Security Council, and I also recognize here the representative of Russia in the permanent seat of the Soviet Union. His lonely hand just raised against the draft resolution has again testified to Russia's isolation and his desperate attempts to deny reality and our common commitments starting from the UN Charter. Putin's envoy has followed in the footsteps of his master in Moscow, where a puppet show has been organized today in an attempt to deny the obvious, that the aggressive and adventurist regime in Russia is heading to its imminent defeat. I'm now going to elaborate on lies that have nothing in common with reality, because the reality is quite different. In reality, Putin has tried to grab territories he does not even physically control on the ground. In reality, Ukrainian forces continue their operations to liberate our sovereign territories. In reality, at least 30 civilians have been killed and 88 wounded following the Russian shelling of Zaporizhzhia earlier today. Russia persists in its genocidal practices of killing Ukrainians, torturing and oppressing them in the occupied territories. Therefore, the only way to make all Ukrainians throughout the sovereign territory of Ukraine feel safe and under the protection of their state is to hoist Ukrainian flags back throughout occupied Donbass, southern Ukraine, and Crimea. Ukraine has every right to liberate its territories and people and will continue to do this regardless of Russia's words or deeds. Sham referendum are elements of aggression against a sovereign state, and anyone involved in organizing or conducting this farce will be held accountable. Dear colleagues, the resolution has not been adopted just because of one negative vote, the vote of Russia. We are tired of repeating it again and again, allowing Russia to avail itself of the right of the Soviet Union to veto decisions of the Security Council effectively prevents this body from exercising its primary responsibility under the UN Charter, maintenance of international peace and security. At this very moment, millions of people around the world see on their screens the devastating impact of the Russian presence in the Security Council and the Council's failure to effectively respond to a most pressing security threat of a global nature. This failure undermines the image and authority of the United Nations as a whole, which is unjust and unfortunate, because the Security Council is only one pillar of this organization, but a broken one. Luckily, this organization can still rely on the other pillars, which are increasingly demonstrating their determination to step in and use their potential to the maximum amid the situation in the Security Council. I avail of this opportunity to again convey the words of appreciation from my President for the Secretary General's clear position and strong statement that he delivered yesterday. A statement of integrity, a statement of commitment to the UN Charter, a beacon of hope for the UN membership. I quote, "It cannot be reconciled with the international legal framework. It stands against everything the international community is meant to stand for. It flouts the purposes and principles of the United Nations. It is a dangerous escalation. It has no place in the modern world. It must not be accepted," said the Secretary General, end of quote. But let me pose a question here, dear colleagues. What if the Secretary General was not a person of the highest moral standards and was not so dedicated in the cause of defending the Charter? This question is not a rhetorical one. We have seen Secretary Generals of different calibers and backgrounds. We all remember Dag Hammarskjöld, who defended the UN purposes and principles and was never intimidated by Moscow's direct threats to him. Yet, there were Secretary Generals who hesitated too long to act to prevent major crises. Today, many of us called upon the Russian ambassador to respect the UN Charter. But let me ask again, why should the Russian Federation respect the Charter that was not followed when letting it occupy the permanent seat of the Soviet Union? Most of you have already heard on many occasions the Ukrainian position on the illegal occupation by Russia of the Soviet seat in the Security Council. But let me quote to you the Russian confession of bypassing the rules of admission to the membership, posted on the UN official website. And I quote, "In fact, the whole process outwardly looked like a simple change of the country nameplate at the table of delegations in the General Assembly and in the Security Council. Instead of the Soviet Union plate, the Russian Federation appeared," end of quote, said right in our face the Soviet envoy to UN in 1991, Yuri Vorontsov. Ladies and gentlemen, not a single vote, not a single formal decision, neither in the Security Council nor in the General Assembly, just a notification by President Yeltsin delivered to the then Secretary General, delivered to the addressee by the Soviet ambassador Vorontsov as an ambassador of a new member state, the Russian Federation. I hope we will never have Secretary Generals of this organization who execute the wishes of Russian presidents and admit new members behind closed doors and without decisions of the Security Council and the General Assembly. What is next, you may ask? Attempts by Russia to manipulate the procedures of the General Assembly to redraw the political map of the world that we may see soon in the coming weeks? We should not tolerate this legal nihilism and the aggressor's presence in the seat of a permanent member any longer. The absence of the necessary treatment has turned Russia into a cancerous tumor in the body of the Security Council. It has to be removed before the entire UN system is metastasized. It is time to act. If this Council is incapable of acting with Russia, it is your duty to act without it. And let me thank all of you who have demonstrated during the vote today your readiness to act as responsible and committed members of the Security Council. I thank Albania, France, Ghana, Ireland, Kenya, Mexico, Norway, United Arab Emirates, United Kingdom, United States. I thank everyone who rejected the Russian negative vote to the benefit of this Security Council, to the benefit of the entire organization, to the benefit of international peace and security. And I thank you.
Je remercie le représentant de l'Ukraine de sa déclaration. Il n'y a plus d'oratrices ou d'orateurs inscrits sur la liste. La séance est levée.